I think some of us have gotten our shit together, more than we did in those years. And I include myself in that because this is a process, right? Like equity is, whether it's kind of internal in your internal structures or how you're thinking about it in terms of your editorial work, it is not something that you can just like check off. Oh, I've done the 6 things. And so now I am a fully equitable business or organization or journalistic practice. It is constantly evolving, and you have to constantly think about the ways that all of the isms, right? All of the systems of discrimination are impacting the work that you do, are impacting your team, and are impacting the communities that you ultimately want to serve. So anyway, I think some of us are working and continue to work really hard at this.
Welcome to the Local News Matters podcast, where we explore pathways to stronger journalism, better businesses, and healthier communities. I'm Tim Regan-Porter, CEO of the Colorado Press Association. This episode, I talk with Jean Friedman-Rudovsky, Executive Director of Resolve Philly. Jean shares insights into the mission of the nonprofit newsroom, which addresses the information needs of underserved communities in Philadelphia through a focus on equity, collaboration, and community engagement. Jean also discusses her journey from international reporting to co-founding Resolve Philly and highlights the organization's impact through initiatives like the Philadelphia Journalism Collaborative and community participatory programs. With her extensive experience and commitment to equity, Jean provides valuable lessons on creating sustainable, community-focused newsrooms that can serve as a role model for others. If you like this episode and what we're doing more generally, please follow in your favorite podcast app, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and tell your friends about us. This is a side project and a labor of love, and your support means a lot. You can find past episodes, full transcripts, and relevant links, and sign up for our newsletter at localnewsmatterspodcast.com, or for lazy typists like me at lnmpod.com. You can also follow us on most social media channels at lnmpod. And now I bring you Jean Friedman-Rudovsky. All right, well, welcome, Jean. Glad to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So you are one of the co-founders of Resolve Philly. Listeners who've paid a lot of attention to what's been going on in local news across the country may have heard about it. It's been doing a lot of interesting things. So why don't you start with just telling us about why you started it? What was the mission? What was the gap you were trying to fill?
Yes, I will start at that beginning. So Resolve Philly's mission is to develop and advance journalism rooted in equity, collaboration, and the elevation of community voices and solutions. And our origin story is interesting because it grew out of work that was being done that had the possibility to have kind of broader impact and be more powerful over time. So I'll explain a little bit what I mean by that. In 2016, I was working with Solutions Journalism Network, which your listeners might be aware of, right? It's an organization that advances the practice of reporting on responses to social problems and not just the problems themselves. I had recently moved back from a decade abroad, being a freelance international reporter, had been connected to the folks at SJN, and they asked me to be their Philadelphia chapter coordinator, essentially, doing workshops and trainings for folks in Philadelphia around solutions journalism, which at that time was not very known, and trying to cultivate a community of journalists who were excited about the approach. So I started doing that work, and along the way met a reporter at the Inquirer named Jane Von Bergen. We went out for a drink one night and we were chatting, and she was like, well, what if we do something a little bit more interesting than just trainings and workshops? And I said, yeah, that sounds great. And she said, well, what about a collaborative reporting project? What if we bring a few reporters together from a few different outlets here in Philadelphia to all do reporting on one topic from a solutions journalism perspective? And I said, that's a brilliant idea. And she said, what about the issue of reentry from prison? She was on the employment beat, and it was something that was particularly interesting to her and that she was passionate about reporting about. She didn't know that I had actually done reporting about the same issue, so I saw its potential. And so I brought that back to the folks at SJN, and they were a bit skeptical. This was, 2016, the field of collaborative journalism was not what it is now. The Center for Cooperative Media was doing excellent work, and certainly there was collaboration in the media field, but not much in local media, and particularly not in Philadelphia, where we were known as a hyper competitive media market. But SJN kind of gave me the green light to talk to newsrooms around the city and try to put something together. So long story short, I was able to bring journalists here together, and we conducted the Reentry Project, which was 13 different news organizations in Philadelphia doing dedicated solutions journalism around the issue of prisoner reentry. And it went really well. There was policy impact, there was great community engagement and response from the project. And most importantly, for Resolve's evolution, the newsrooms involved wanted to keep working together. And so we put in for a grant when that ended to continue this collaborative work in some way, maybe switch editorial topic, but to keep working together. And at that point, SJN said to me, this is great work, but it's not in our long-term strategic plan to kind of house this kind of place-based work within SJN. You should go do this on your own. And so in the beginning of 2018, I launched Broke in Philly, which was the next iteration of the collaborative project. There was 21 newsrooms focusing on solutions to poverty and economic mobility. And in the beginning part of that year, came together with Cassie Haynes, who is someone I knew in my personal life. She was a friend. We met through our kids who attended daycare together. And she and I together saw the power of having a critical mass of local media organizations wanting to do their work differently, wanting to serve their communities differently, wanting to work together, wanting to do solutions journalism. And so we together founded Resolve.
And how would you describe how it's gone? What's the trajectory been like?
Yeah, the trajectory has been fast. We are now pretty different than how we started, in the sense that at the beginning, Resolve was essentially a vehicle for a collaborative reporting project. We still maintain that collaborative. Broken Philly lasted 5 years. We sunset that project last year. It was incredible. Over 3,000 stories produced, ton of policy impact, just like really wonderful impact and outputs, and kind of evolved into a model. It's now the Philadelphia Journalism Collaborative. So not kind of rooting the identity in an editorial topic, but really an ongoing, sustained partnership amongst now 31 news organizations in Philadelphia. Along the way, we also developed a lot of work kind of around that and alongside it, to the extent that right now Resolve is in and of itself a newsroom. As we say, really a newsroom designed for community impact, and one that we think is a model for the future of local news. And I can talk about kind of what I mean by that. And we base our work on 3 core principles. Collaboration, right? That remains kind of at the heart of what we do, maintaining the collaborative and always looking to be complementary to what exists here in Philadelphia to serve information needs. The second pillar is community responsive and participatory journalism. So really making sure that the editorial work that we are doing is informed by those who we seek to serve. Resolve has 6 priority communities. They are broadly folks who have been long harmed and excluded by traditional media narratives here in Philadelphia, and trying to get them actively involved in the news creation process. So we have documenters here in Philadelphia, which, a lot of listeners probably know is a wonderful program that was started by City Bureau. And there's now, I think, 15 or 16 cities where we all recruit, train, and pay community members to take public notes at meetings to build a new public record. So getting folks really involved in the process. Within Resolve, we have a hyper-local newsroom that serves the Germantown neighborhood of Philadelphia, historically Black neighborhood in the city. And we have within that our editor and reporter and organizer for that work just focus on what do folks in Germantown need to know. So that's our second pillar, community responsive and participatory journalism. And the third is bridging the information divide. We feel really strongly that it's important to meet people where they are with news and information. So in Philadelphia, almost 20% of our city residents do not have steady and reliable access to internet. And so we try to figure out ways that we are getting people vital news and information that doesn't make them come to our website to access it kind of directly. So examples of that are we run a SMS text line, so similar to, Outlier Media, who probably a lot of your listeners know as well, engaging with people via text to both kind of answer their questions and concerns. It's an open bilingual Spanish and English text line where anyone in the city can ask a question, as we say, anything related to needing something to survive and thrive in the city of Philadelphia. And our staff, our reporter, Luisa, will answer those questions. And then twice a week, we use the line to send out news and information that we know is valuable to our subscriber base. So our subscriber base is mainly in low-income neighborhoods in the city. So we send out information on job opportunities, where to find a free turkey around Thanksgiving, community fridges, if there is a new, rent relief program, or ways to find support for if you are being threatened with an eviction. And we send that out proactively twice a week. We also publish a free community newsletter that with evergreen information and stories and narratives that we distribute at rec centers and shelters and public libraries and places where folks are waiting and able to sort of peruse, magazines and reading material that are there, and hoping that that is more relevant to them than maybe some of the other material that might be in those spaces.
That is a lot. How big is your staff?
It is, right. So, right, you asked the question about growth. Cassie and I started this together in 2018. We hired our first small group of staff in 2019. We are now 25 full-time folks with 4 interns and currently 2 fellows. And we always pay our interns and our fellows. So it's been a lot of growth. We are focusing now on better, not bigger, and really making sure that we are doing solid, in-depth reporting and engagement work here in Philadelphia, and not kind of continue the exponential growth that we've had.
Yeah, so there's a lot I want to dig into and talk about, specifics of implementing on those pillars and what other newsrooms can learn and adapt. But I want to start with maybe the focus on equity that I think undergirds a lot, undergirds your work. And I want to quote something you said in a Neiman Lab prediction back in 2020. So you said, "We cannot truly consider ourselves stewards of public trust and information if we aren't embodying equity at every level. In 2021, journalism will get its shit together. For the sake of democracy, for the sake of our economic future as an industry, for the sake of the communities we serve, for the sake of the people we employ." And I really love that you've encompassed that equity is important for all of it. It's important for, just sort of in terms of our values and our sense of community and democracy writ large, but also for our own economics and for our own staff. It really is a bedrock principle that affects all of those. So you feel free to elaborate on that. And then I'll start by asking, how well do you think we've gotten our shit together?
Good question. Yes, I remember that prediction very well, which Cassie Haynes, my co-founder, and I wrote. And, I think some of us have gotten our shit together, more than we did in those years. And I include myself in that because this is a process, right? Like equity is, whether it's kind of internal in your internal structures or how you're thinking about it in terms of your editorial work, it is not something that you can just like check off. Oh, I've done the 6 things. And so now I am, a fully equitable business or organization or journalistic practice. It is constantly evolving, and you have to constantly think about the ways that all of the isms, right? All of the systems of discrimination are impacting the work that you do, are impacting your team, and are impacting the communities that you ultimately want to serve. So anyway, I think some of us are working and continue to work really hard at this. I think unfortunately we are seeing what some are labeling the great retrenchment away from a focus on DE&IB, so diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, that be, coined by Maynard Institute in this space, which I think is really important because I think that that sense of belonging really added so much to kind of the standard DE and I speak and approach. And so I think, right now we're facing a real retrenchment both from funders and kind of the public writ large in terms of how important this is, and not just how important it is, but all out attacks on it, attacks on affirmative action, attacks on I was just seeing a ruling today. I'm forgetting which state it's in. It just kind of came across my email in the last couple of hours that really questions even funding opportunities that specifically target and privilege folks who have been long disempowered or excluded from certain funding circles. So I think we're in a real kind of dangerous time for the issue of equity, not just in journalism, but kind of in society at large. I hope that we can get back to that place where it is talked about all the time and everywhere, and where we can focus again on getting our shit together and making that a priority. Because I think the other thing that we've seen, so what I just described in terms of Resolve's work is our editorial work, the work of our newsroom, and the programmatic work that we do. One of our alternative revenue streams for Resolve is actually a consulting and professional development practice called Modifier. And so, for example, Cassie and I do consulting with some organizations, with newsrooms who want to embed, equity more deeply into their policies and practices, and who want to do, community engagement. Our community engagement team does wonderful work with newsrooms actually across the world. And so we've even seen from that vantage point this sort of retrenchment. And often it comes in little ways, right? It is budget cuts across newsrooms. And what are the first things to go, right? It's professional development lines. It's things that kind of seem like nice add-ons, right? The kind of nice to haves rather than the needs to have, which, we all as organizational leaders who are in challenging financial times, we always have to make those really tough decisions. But I think often those things are the first thing to go, not wanting to bring on support to, kind of constructively think about how equity is advancing in an organization. And so it's just, it's challenging times on all fronts for those of us who are both, wanting to do this work inside of our own organizations and wanting to support others to do it as well.
Do you have any thoughts? Obviously, part of that is tied up in the national discussion and politics and, the Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action in colleges. But it looks very different at the local level when you're on the ground and you're seeing the impact of communities who have been excluded. Do you have any thoughts on how we move forward and get it out of sort of this really polarized national discussion and into something that is more practical and down to the people who it's actually impacting?
I do have thoughts. So I'll address it kind of in two ways. One, kind of in the internal and then external. So internal, I think some of it is there are things that can be done to advance and instill equity within an organization that don't take outside resources, that don't take dedicated funding, that really just means that you are thinking about power dynamics within your own organization, and making policies and practices that are, more fair, more equitable. I'll give an example of what I mean. So within Resolve, we have a tiered, we give annual raises every year, and we have a tiered system where those of us who make the most, so our executive team, which is me, Becca Gorlick, our chief programs officer, and our chief operating officer and our new chief programs officer, who she has just started with us, but we're making a public announcement, so you will soon know. Anyway, the three of us who make the most in the organization, we receive the smallest raise every year, whereas the entry-level positions, associate positions, receive the largest raise every year, proportion to their income. So it is a very small thing that leaders of organizations can do to instill equitable practices like that. There are, things that come up kind of on the spur of the moment. I remember early on in Resolve's history, so in 2020, we were doing work with Play Streets, which is a program run by the Philadelphia Recs Department where they shut down streets throughout the summer to make play spaces for kids. And our community engagement team was wanting to visit a lot of these play streets to distribute our newsletter and talk about our text line and just, show up and understand kind of where people are at. Because that's a lot of the work of our community engagement team is just showing up and talking with folks to understand what's going on in their lives. And pretty early on, we were told, I'm sorry, but your community engagement editor at the time, he's now our director, Derek Kane, can't actually come and visit our sites because he is a returning citizen. And so, they had policies and practices. They had a policy that said someone who, has a prior felony conviction cannot come and visit our space. And so rather than saying, oh, okay, sorry, we'll send someone else from our team, we pushed back and said, actually, we need to figure out a workaround because he is a vital part of our organization and staff, and we're not going to just send someone else in his place. And so we figured out a solution where he would be accompanied when he is, hosting stuff at a Parks and Rec site, but he was still able to go. So all of those are just little things that, employers and leaders can do to advance equity. Externally, my firm belief is that doing community responsive reporting, serving information needs, genuinely understanding the information that the folks in, amongst your audience in your community who you are trying to serve, that is a practice of equity in and of itself. Switching sort of our reporter mindset from this kind of all-knowing, editorial ivory tower, I'm mixing metaphors here, this kind of all-knowing editorial place of we know what is best. We know the stories that we should report. We, meaning we as reporters, we as editors, I identify as a lifelong journalist. So this is like near and dear to my heart because I know I operated this way for years and years and years. I'm just thinking, oh, I know what a good story is. I know what folks need to understand about their lives. And that's the story that I'm going to do. When in fact, we don't always know. We can have good instincts and we can have good hunches, and it's, important to trust those. And also, if we are not in consistent conversation with the folks that we are literally exist to serve, then we're not sustaining, I think, equitable practices in journalism. If there's not an element of that conversation and genuine community engagement, there's something that's missing.
You mentioned sort of that all-knowing perspective, which brings me back to one of your core pillars of participatory journalism. I think kind of as with the equity angle, participatory journalism solves so many problems in the industry. We have a pipeline problem in terms of not diversity, certainly, but also just in general. I worry about, the number of people we're attracting into the field who are really devoted to it. We're just not going to have the finances or the people to do the work we did in when news was at peak from an industry perspective. And so we have to open our platforms to our communities and tap into their expertise and their knowledge as well as their needs. And so I just think it's such an important pillar. And can you talk to me a little bit about what does that look like? How do you actually put that into practice? How do you tap into your community and have them participate?
One example, of course, is documenters that I've already, discussed. And I think it's, it's such a wonderful program. It's such a wonderful way to kind of clearly tap into that, and also in a really accessible way, right? Because it is a 2-hour training that anyone can take, and you come out of that really prepared to be a documenter. And it doesn't mean, I think it's really important for folks who don't know about this program to understand that it's not like we're sending people out to document public meetings and city council hearings and other things, and then they just are directly throwing their notes onto a website. We have 2 people who lead that program here within Resolve, and they spend a lot of time editing and fact checking and making sure, because that's important too, right? In order for us to remain a trusted and verified source of news and information, we have to have those backstops. So I think often when people hear participatory journalism, they think it's essentially like sort of going back to like a blog model of you just open something up and anyone can write anything. And that's not what it is for us. There is still the rigor that is involved in, any true journalistic practice, but yes, it is participatory. It includes people who are not trained journalists. A few other ways that we incorporate folks into this process. So the newsletter, the free community newsletter that I talked about, that is editorially guided by a group that we call our Info Hub captains. So these are folks around the city who are already kind of neighborhood level leaders who, even before we, are working with them, already play sort of an informal role as information conduits in their neighborhood. They are the block captains, the ward leaders, the woman who runs a home daycare on her block and who is connected to everyone. And so we connect with them both to better understand information needs at a block to block level, but then also so that we're ensuring that our newsletter is, again, responding to information needs. And so they're the ones who often help us choose a topic for each newsletter. They're often writing pieces, again, that are edited by us, but contributing and participating in the production of that work. And then I would say the last example of this, we also do work on what we call community narratives. So Dio Robeson is our associate editor of community narratives, and she works with folks who want to tell their own stories and works with them to craft pieces for op-eds or for publication around the city. So with going back to that collaborative that I talked about at the beginning, and working with people who, again, have long been either harmed or excluded by media narratives, who don't actually want someone to just come and report on something that happened to them, but they want an opportunity to talk about it themselves. And so she works with them and gives community narrative workshops to help people be better prepared when they want to take those, the avenues that do exist in other outlets for writing something yourself and not just being reported on.
Do you have any thoughts on, if I'm thinking about small newsrooms or even, maybe slightly bigger newsrooms, but they're lean, they're in the daily grind, they don't have funding to do participatory journalism. Do you have any thoughts on an on-ramp? How can a busy editor and reporting team start reaching out and incorporating the community into what they do?
Yeah, well, I think that there are real small steps that folks can take without dedicated funding and without adding new staff members. One easy way is to host, your version of a community listening session. At Resolve, we call them sound offs because the idea is literally for folks to just kind of come in and sound off about what's going on in their lives. And going into it without an agenda, without a story idea that you have in your head, without thinking about what are the quotes that I'm going to pull for this for a story, but genuinely just to give people a place to talk about what's going on in their lives, and to have that help inform how you do coverage going forward. So that is, it's the lower end of participatory because it's not necessarily people who are writing, but I would say it is participatory because you are inviting them into your editorial process, right? So instead of just, again, in the editorial meeting, thinking about what stories should we be doing and coming up with ideas and workshopping those ideas, you are opening up that part of the process to people who are not trained journalists and to people who you ultimately want your reporting to be of use for.
And earlier you used the phrase newsroom design for the future of local news. So yeah, can you expound on what you meant by that?
Yeah. I think those three pillars of collaboration, community responsive and participatory journalism, and meeting people where they are with news and information are just really vital for any local news organization to be thinking about into the future, to be sustainable, and sustainable in the sense of like being relevant in people's lives. I'm not talking, I mean, obviously this is tied to financial sustainability, but when I say sustainable, I just mean, yeah, being relevant, and being a source of news and information and journalism that your audience wants to go to. I think everyone needs to be thinking about those three pillars. That does not mean that everyone should have the exact scale or structure of Resolve, because that would be wild, because, Resolve was developed for this particular space and place of Philadelphia, and that is why, we didn't sort of go the networked model approach of like Resolve Dallas and Resolve, Chicago. And that was never in our plan, because that wouldn't have worked, because it has to be built from the ground up. And so we really believe that those three core pillars are the future of local news. There are probably others. I'm not saying it's all encompassing, but if you're a local newsroom and you're not thinking about those three things, I would ask you, why not? And I would urge you to be thinking more actively about them, because I think each one is really vital to sustaining, the work that you do and the work that we do as an industry writ large. What it also means, though, is that it may lead you to a different structure of your newsroom than the model that we've seen for centuries. Essentially, it may lead you to not having a structure where it is a bank of reporters, a bank of editors, and then, quote unquote, business side folks. For example, we have a 4-person community engagement team. And that is like the work that they do is, as I described, hosting sound offs, being out in communities, and really developing those relationships of trust so that people want to, read our reporting, want to sign up for the text line, and so that our editorial content is better serving their needs. It may look like having less separation and sort of the firewall between business and editorial. And I don't mean that in the sense of, okay, now, whatever potential, money lines there are, that should influence the editorial practices, because of course that does not happen here and should not happen anywhere. But to our editorial meetings, our editorial meetings are open to our entire staff, because we genuinely believe that everyone on our team can give great input and feedback on stories that we're thinking about and projects that we're working on. Our staff is highly representative of the communities that we seek to serve here in Philadelphia. And so why wouldn't, when given the opportunity, invite them into conversations on what we're thinking about editorially? And so there's little ways, I think, that we can be challenging ourselves to rethink even the structures of the newsrooms and how we are putting together staffing going forward.
Well, collaboration has been something that's been crucial to, not only Resolve Philly, but your efforts before this. And collaboration can be really, really hard. And so I want to talk about 7 lessons that you and a couple coworkers wrote for LMA. But first, just in general, how would you describe the challenges of collaboration?
There's a lot of challenges of collaboration. I think one of the biggest challenges actually are that it is misunderstood sometimes. I think that folks approach collaboration too often from a framework of equality and not equity, meaning equality, we all need to do the same thing. We should all be, kind of putting in the exact same amount of time, receiving the exact same amount on the other end, when that, at least in the media space, doesn't work for collaboration, because we're all starting from such different vantage points, and such different, and all starting with genuine and deep power imbalances, most likely if you're working in a local media space, because often you're bringing together, 150-year paper of, record with new startup over here, with small Spanish-speaking outlet over here. And so you are coming to the table from really disparate places. And so the idea that just because we're all sitting down in collaboration, we can erase all the history, we can erase all the power imbalances, and everything that folks are bringing to that table, and just kind of create a one-size-fits-all working relationship. I think we need to do away with that idea. And I think too many people approach collaboration with that mindset. And so one of the things that I think has really impacted the success of our ability to sustain this collaborative year after year here in Philadelphia is that we don't try to we think about equity rather than equality, and we don't try to kind of shove those power imbalances under the rug. So I think that's a key challenge. I think that kind of misconception of what people show up to a collaborative expecting.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I think gets people in trouble too is not understanding why they're collaborating in the first place, and what the benefits are, and why in some cases, for your sake of your community, it might even be a necessity. So what would you say to those points?
I think you're absolutely right. Right. Just doing collaboration for the sake of collaboration also doesn't make sense. There needs to be some unified goal or mission. And also there needs to be space for an understanding that we are all trying to get something different out of this. Right. And so, for example, like within Broke in Philly, right, there was a agreed upon mission that we are going to be doing, improved solutions journalism rooted in community engagement around this specific topic to be able to, frankly, try to lift our city out of poverty, or decrease poverty numbers, and to be really clear about the fact that, we believe that there needs to be better reporting on this topic, and we can't just focus on the problems. That's unified mission, right? We're all kind of in agreement that this is the thing that we are doing. And also, every single news organization who was part of Broke of Philly was also there for different reasons. Some wanted to expand their audience. Some wanted to be able to, test the power of bilingual joint reporting. Some folks wanted to be able to have opportunities to, do more engagement and host more events because they know that their newsroom wasn't capable of doing that on their own, and so they could partner with someone else. And so understanding that we have to have these layers for what we each want to achieve, there has to be that agreed upon unified, mission and what we're striving for. And also there should be space for everyone to have a clear understanding of why they are showing up specifically.
Yeah, and I think embedded in that discussion of understanding the mission is just the sense that the power that can come from collaboration. So not only can you do work that you might not be able to do on your own, when you have multiple outlets in Philadelphia reporting on a topic, it's no longer just a lone voice in the wind. And I think there are good examples of that in Philadelphia where you've coordinated coverage and really gotten people's attention, including policymakers.
Yeah, exactly. It is right. The total is greater than the sum of its parts. That is sort of what you're aiming for with collaboration. And you're right. There's someone actually who now sits on Resolve's board. His name is Glenn Bergman. For a while, he was the director of Philabundance, which is the largest kind of food sustainability organization, and providing food to folks who are hungry here in Philadelphia. He was the head of Philabundance when Broke in Philly started, and he hadn't. It's not like he had heard that this collaborative reporting project on poverty had started. But all of a sudden, he started getting so many more calls about the work that his organization does, with reporters who are equipped with better questions and who are really trying to kind of dig more under the surface than they ever had been about the work that Philabundance does. And he was genuinely perplexed, right? He tells the story anytime that anyone asks him about why he eventually joined Resolve's board after he left his position at Philabundance. He was just sort of blown over by the fact that a large group of newsrooms in Philadelphia wanted to dedicate their attention to this. And he said it mattered materially, like it absolutely mattered materially in the work that Philabundance could do, and that he saw sort of in the broader conversation around poverty in that nonprofit sector that, of course, he was a part of. And so, yeah, it just, someone who is on our staff now, our senior development director, Lee Wack, was when Broken Philly was happening. He was actually the communications director for the superintendent for the school district. He also was starting to get all of these calls of, connecting more education with poverty issues in the area and economic mobility. And he too was like, what is going on? Like, why is this happening? So yes, it was noticed sort of on all sides of the spectrum. And that's what you want. That's the power of it.
So I do want to go through those 7 lessons just really quickly, because I think there's some specific points you call out that could be useful for people. So the first 2 are independent leadership, someone whose sole job is the collaboration, and having a project manager that's not housed at any one of the participating organizations. Can you talk a little bit about why those 2 are important?
Yeah, that was really important when we first started the work, because there had been such, folks had tried local news collaboration here in Philadelphia. There had been collaborative reporting projects, and there was a sense that they were often kind of housed or initiated within larger newsrooms in the city. And that felt really uncomfortable for smaller newsrooms who were being asked to participate, because they felt like they didn't have as much of a say in what was going on, because it was, the person at the largest organization in the room who was kind of running the show. And I think particularly in forming the collaborative, it was helpful that I had literally no allegiance and sort of no history in the Philadelphia journalism area. I am originally from Philly, but I had left here for college and then, was abroad for a decade and had just moved back. And so I didn't know folks here, which, obviously I then needed allies to help me have introductions and connections. So I couldn't have built it on my own as an outsider. And also I think, for me particularly, it was helpful. It was like, oh, it's not like Jean is, she used to be at the Inquirer, or she was at this place, or she was at this place. And so it doesn't mean that you need someone exactly like me to start a local media collaborative, but I think having that independence at the outset is really important.
And the next 2 really relate to understanding the relationships and among both the publications, including histories of competition, and also, among all the collaborative participants, including the community.
Yeah, so I think, that goes back to sort of what I was saying earlier about, one of the things that's really important, particularly at the outset, is just not trying to kind of sweep that history or power imbalances under the rug, because they exist. And if you try to ignore them or don't, and not just try to ignore them, but if you're trying to put together a collaborative and you're not actually actively asking to understand some of that history, if you don't already know it, then I think it is important to even just try to surface it, because again, it exists there whether you're talking about it or not. So you may as well create a space where you can talk about it, where it can be heard. And I don't necessarily mean, large conflict resolution or anything like that, but just being aware of what's happened in the past. Like, it was incredibly important that I understand the history of collaborative projects here in Philadelphia as I was putting together the reentry project, both to learn lessons of what went well and also to understand what didn't go so well, and to be able to try to, rectify that moving forward.
And the 5th one is choosing a topic that minimizes competition and doesn't really activate that scoop mindset.
Yes, this was really key, again, particularly at the beginning, because, if it's an initial collaboration and folks are just working together for the first time, we all as journalists have this have this kind of scoop mentality. It is embedded in us kind of from the beginning. It's, there's so much wrapped into it, whether it's journalism teachings or even just like personal ego. You want to be the one to do the thing that gets, the story that has a lot of likes or a lot of impact, whatever it is. And so first of all, I think that is changing bit by bit, which is great. But we have to admit it still exists within the industry and within a lot of us as journalists. And so finding an area where, again, yes, it minimizes it, right? So I think a lot of political reporting is not the best thing for a sustained collaborative of this nature, because I think there is, a tendency to want to get scoops. And so finding a topic that is relevant to the community that you want to serve, and also is not the one that folks are already scrambling to try to cover and be the first out the door with. So, reentry in that way was really perfect because, Philadelphia at that time had the highest incarceration rate proportional to population of any city in the country. And at that time we had, around 200,000 people or more who had criminal backgrounds in the city. And so, there were so many returning citizens, and there were going to be so many more as, the years continued on. And yet, and there were certainly news outlets that were covering reentry, but it wasn't its own beat. It wasn't something that folks were, kind of elbowing each other out of the way to get story angles and ideas for. And so that, I think, made it really appealing and much more safe, particularly at the beginning. I do just want to add, though, on this, I think we've evolved the collaborative here in Philadelphia to not have a specific topic like reentry or poverty, to be more sort of in-depth and systems reporting, and for there to be a range of topics that covers, to allow for deeper collaboration. We did that only after 6 years, essentially, of working together as a collaborative. There was, we went through a process with the newsrooms to try to decide what to do next. And there was a lot of interest in exploring sort of a 2.0 or a revised, or in our case, maybe a 3.0, a revised concept of what a local news collaboration can be that isn't grounded in one single topic. So I think, you can evolve over time, but starting out with that one concrete topic that mediates competitiveness is great.
And then the sixth is finding the right champion at each participating news organization. What makes for the right champion?
Finding a champion is key. And what makes a good champion is a couple things. One, that person themselves is interested in this, like brings some collaborative spirit. You don't want someone to be, as we call them, like your kind of newsroom rep, the person who is kind of representing the newsroom to the collaborative, to be someone who's just wholly uninterested in this work. That's not going to work, because a lot of it is going to hinge on this person, bringing back information to their newsroom, actively engaging in Slack channels, in meetings, in all of the things that it takes, all of the little things that it takes to get the reporting moving forward and to keep the collaboration moving forward. So you want someone, first and foremost, someone who wants to be there, and wants to be there because they are excited about all of the wonderful benefits of collaboration that we have already talked about. Second, it's really great to have someone who has enough power within the newsroom that they can make things happen, but also is not so kind of far removed from the day-to-day editorial and reporting work that there's like 6 steps before it gets to, a reporter or editor who needs to work on a story. So often that's kind of, it can be, it really depends in each newsroom, but a news director level, a managing editor level, if it's about a specific beat, it is, the editor that is responsible for that beat, perhaps. We also work with a lot of small newsrooms where it's just 1 or 2 people, and so it's really clear who it's going to be. But for larger newsrooms, finding someone that has some power to make things happen, but not kind of too quote unquote powerful that they are really far from the work.
The other thing I would add to that, and I'm thinking of just, my history and myself as a leader and business development or editorial collaborations or anything else, is being able to communicate back to your own team. Sometimes, particularly as leaders, we hold on to things and we have a vision and we've had this conversation with someone and it's all in our head and we don't share that back.
Exactly. Someone, yes, who is a great communicator and understands that that's part of their role. Like part of their role is showing up and having great ideas. And then the other part of it is that communication. Yes, great addition.
And then 7, we've already talked about, be sure everyone understands the value in the collaboration and also understanding that the organizations have different perspectives and we'll get different things out of it.
Yeah.
So, when I think about news ecosystems that are doing interesting work, that are very collaborative, I think of Chicago and North Carolina and New Jersey and Colorado, but maybe no place more than Philadelphia. What's in the water there?
Well, that's a separate question. My husband used to work for the water department. We could have a long, I'm just kidding. I mean, he did work for the water department, but the water is perfectly safe here. I think, this is a city of folks who are, for lack of a better word, just like gritty and resilient. I mean, some folks who are listening may know that we actually have a mascot called Gritty. He is this like crazy orange monster. He is the mascot for the Flyers. And I think it's, he is obviously such a favorite here in Philadelphia, because I think it really embodies this Philadelphia spirit of just like, yeah, like let's just try it. And we're going to be direct and we're going to be honest with, ourselves, and we're not going to kind of beat around the bush. We're just going to like try a thing. And if it doesn't work, great. But if it works, like let's keep doing it. And, keep giving each other the feedback and candid conversation that we need to have to continue to grow and to work together. When I look at the success that we've had here in terms of collaboration and just like the wonderful amount of attention that is being put towards local news and information, and folks every year starting new things and starting wonderful new startups in the news space. I think Resolve came at the right time here in Philadelphia. Timing is so important in so many things, and I think us being able to begin a collaborative at a moment in journalism when, the rug had been taken out from under us, right? And there was a bit of just kind of chaos and unbelievable uncertainty in the industry. And I think the silver lining from that is that when it's so clear that the thing that you have been doing for so long isn't working anymore and isn't going to keep you relevant and sustainable, you are forced to try something new. And I think that's part of what collaboration offered at this specific moment in time in Philadelphia. And so I think we were able to, within the work of the Reentry Project and Broken Philly, and then kind of Resolve over time, just be here at the right time. And I think it was so core to our mission and who we are, that even as we evolved as, a newsroom unto ourselves and doing our own reporting and editorial work, it still is just a core of what we do. So I think, there was something about timing and something about just the kind of Philadelphia spirit. And it's, the credit goes to the collaborative partners who have stuck in this for so long. Again, last year when Broke in Philly ended, everyone could have been like, yeah, no, that was fun, we're done. And every single newsroom who was a part of Broke wanted to stay in it and be actively involved in deciding what the future of the collaborative would look like. And to me, that's sort of the biggest testament, is just like their persistence and dedication to this work. Because as we talked about earlier, it's hard. It is not easy. And I think the fact that folks still want to be doing this is because they're great Philadelphians.
One of the things I find fascinating about the ecosystem there is just how diverse it is in terms of the local news ecosystem. So you've got, it's one of Knight Foundation's core 8 cities. You've got Temple, and then, Linfest, and, all the way down to, a lot of smaller newsrooms. And, Jim Brady started his experiment with Billy Penn there in Philadelphia. And so just the the number of different groups working together. This is not dominated by, just a Knight Foundation coming in or something like that. And so that makes for a lot of interesting experiments. And I think something that a lot of communities can learn from, and hopefully to aspire to have that diversity of voices and types of organizations.
Yeah, I think that's true. So many different organizations like that, so many funders and, other institutions at play. And then, yeah, so many different folks who are just, as I said, 31 now partner newsrooms within the collaborative. There are more out here in Philadelphia, and each one is doing something distinct. And I think that's just a really wonderful thing for the people of the city.
And one of the things you've written about for your own relationship to that ecosystem and your funding, and forgive me, I forgot to note where I found this at and when it was written, but you wrote about that, you've avoided asking audience directly for money because you don't want to compete with, the members of the collaborative. So you're largely depending on, big foundations for funding. I think you were talking about doing a high net worth individual campaign. But can you talk a little bit about that decision and why you think that's important?
Yeah, so it has been really important because I think, we do play such a we just have to walk a really fine line here in Philadelphia in terms of our role. And so from the beginning, didn't want to feel like we were, sort of capitalizing off of other folks's, readers and the editorial work that they're doing within the collaborative by building up that, reader revenue. Because we also, the work that is produced within the collaborative, we will post it on our site, but when we are, doing the newsletter that we send out, that's the collection of, PJC, Philadelphia Journalism Collaborative reporting, or on social media, we are always pointing people to the newsrooms that produce that work and not, to our site where we have it listed, but more as just kind of a catalog or like a repository of the work that's being done. And so it felt really important that we continue to direct people to the reporting where it's happening, and that folks be able to, generate their own reader revenue off of that and not have us try to come in and interrupt that relationship. So yes, for us, certainly, foundation funding is incredibly important. We do have a major giving program, and so have, built that up over the past couple of years, which is hard work, but we are, keeping at it. We have the modifier practice that I talked about, the professional development work, and we'll be exploring some other revenue streams going forward. We've known from the beginning that having an over-reliance on foundation funding is also not sustainable. And so, these other streams are great. And also we just need to keep adding more of them because the more, as I'm sure people have said on your podcast before, the more diversified, the better. So that if one, has a tough year, the others can compensate. So, it's a challenge for us as it is with others, but we're in a strategic planning process for the next 3 years. And really a core part of this is going to be thinking about how we are also being able to generate some revenue in other areas.
Yeah. And I think the thoughtfulness to how you approach funding that you've shown is really important, and something all nonprofit and even for-profit leaders should think about. I mean, in the startup world, you hear about smart money and you want to really be strategic, and I think the same is true certainly in nonprofit world. And, there's an institutional pull. You're leaving money on the table. You probably had individuals wanting to become a member, give you money in some way. And so understanding your mission and your relationship in the ecosystem, I think, is crucial.
Yeah, it is. And to be clear, there is a donate button on our site. If someone wants to go and donate money, they can. But that's different than trying to, than spending a lot of organizational time and resources dedicated to building that up. And yeah, it's, we as humans we are wired for scarcity. It is how we evolved as a species. It is what brought us here, right? It is what kept us alive in past times, was being scarce with our resources, of being, hoarding resources, having a scarcity mindset, because resources literally were scarce, and resources, meaning food and shelter and water and the things we needed to survive. Our world has evolved so much, and certainly a lot of folks right now are living in scarcity. I don't mean to to say that that is not a reality for a lot of people in this country and, of course, across the world. And also, even those of us who are not kind of living in scarcity on a day-to-day basis, that is how our brains have developed at just a genuine biological level. There is 100-to-1 bias, essentially, for scarcity over abundance. And so we have to work really hard to reframe how we're thinking about things. And it's hard. I am a fundraiser, right? I see a limited amount of, there's a, call for applications. They will take 6 of them. There are 50 candidates, right? We are forced into this scarcity mindset too. But it's really important to try to pull back and see things from an abundance framework. And that, it's just, anyway, it's a constant struggle, and it's because we are struggling against, kind of our human genetics in a way.
All right, so now time for the rapid fire questions, and my questions will be fast, but your answers don't have to be.
Okay.
So compared to a year ago, are you more or less optimistic about the future of local news?
More. Because every week, every month, every year, there are more and more of us who are doing work or starting things to address community information needs. And I think that is vital. I think it's vital to the well-being of our cities and towns and counties. I think it is vital to our increasingly fragile democracy. And so, there are more of us now. I don't mean I know that there's been a lot of layoffs, but what I mean is that there's so many of us who are starting new things and who are seeking to kind of create change within larger institutions. And that inspires me.
Does AI fill you with more hope or dread when it comes to journalism?
Oh, I don't know. I would say I'm a little bit middle of the road here. I don't actually think it's going to take away reporters' jobs. And I think if it is, then that is not a job that we should continue to be doing, in the sense that the whole point of reporting is to provide new and fresh perspectives on things. If the reporting that you're doing can literally just be sourced by a Google search, then that's not great journalism. And so there's so many people in this space who are thinking about how we leverage AI for operational needs within newsrooms. I think there is a lot that can be done. And also I know that I don't know, I'm just a little bit scared of AI in general. So.
All right. What's the best single piece of advice you've been given?
I'll give 2 on this, and I will also say who they're from. One, feedback is a gift. This is from Corey Ford, who leads the Salzburger Executive Leadership Program at Columbia University. Feedback is a gift. It's not a demand for change. There's no such thing as positive and negative feedback. There is affirmative feedback, and there is developmental feedback, right? Feedback that can help you develop into, being a better version of yourself or your organization. And I think if it is hard to really embrace that and live by it. But if you think of feedback as just more data from which you can make better decisions, it opens up a world of possibilities. And aligned with that, take your work seriously, not personally. This is something that Mark Hecker, who is the strategic planning consultant that we're working with, has reminded us, because it is so easy to take things personally. I mean, particularly in my position as, Resolve as an organization that I founded, I take so much of it personally. I am working so hard to take it seriously and not personally.
Do you have a favorite failure of yours?
I don't know if it's a favorite, but we tried to do some tech product development, as a nonprofit newsroom, and we weren't able to do it. And it was for a lot of reasons. But I think what I've really focused on is, the lessons that we learned from it. I think we learned lessons on, needing to experiment small really early rather than kind of going big on a big thing right from the beginning. I think we spent a lot of time and resources just trying to kind of shoot for the stars rather than prototyping, doing something small, testing it. It taught me a lot about what this space was ready for. At the time, we were looking for folks who wanted to do impact investment. So, investment with real low return on the dollar over time. And they were not ready for a few years ago. And now, of course, we have people who we had those conversations with 3 years ago who are like, wait, now we're ready. Now we got our board like on board with doing some impact investment. And it's like, well, sorry, so it was another lesson about timing and just kind of understanding that you can have a great idea. And also if the timing is not right, it's not going to move forward, and being able to understand both the situation that you're in and also looking a bit into the future.
Running an organization can be draining. Being in news can be draining. Just being alive in these days can be draining. What's one thing you do to restore yourself and maintain your sanity?
I have to move my body. I'm an athlete. I've been an athlete since I was young, running, biking, swimming, going for walks. That restores my sanity, on a daily and weekly basis. But then bigger picture I'm an introvert. And so I get restored literally when I'm like in nature, in the woods, away from people.
Yeah. And as a leader, particularly one whose organization is really founded on the bedrock of equity, the people who work for us, have their own, needs for mental health, and particularly people who come from different backgrounds, disadvantaged backgrounds, might have unique needs. What do you do, or what recommendations do you have for leaders in who are just trying to help their team stay sane?
Yeah, this is so important because, as I mentioned earlier, so much of our staff are, very, very representative of the communities that we seek to serve. I think we gotta make space for people to take care of themselves as humans. A real simple thing is, I go to therapy. A lot of folks on my staff go to therapy. We encourage people to schedule their therapy appointments during the day, right? Like you shouldn't have to take, especially, I am also a parent of 2 young-ish kids. My kids are 9 and 4.5, and I don't really want to have to like sacrifice the very few hours that I have with them in the evenings or on the weekends doing therapy. And so I take it during the day, and that's what other people on my team do. We have an unlimited paid time off policy, which is, that is something that you have to give a lot of attention and care to. It's not something, as Cassie used to say, it's not a crock pot policy. You can't just set it and forget it. But also that, is helpful. We've done a lot of different things with our staff. We've done trauma-informed psychoeducation courses, like as a group that folks could take. And just really, understanding that if you are building teams that are representative of the communities that you serve, the work feels infinitely harder, making space for conversations that need to happen. We've even had conversations about, kind of rules and guidelines of presenting things in Slack that could be really, really hard to hear for folks on our staff. So yeah, even little things.
Do you have a favorite or unusual time-saving hack?
I really try to, do the hardest thing that I have to do that day in the morning or earliest. And the hardest thing can vary, right? Sometimes it's writing a grant report. Sometimes it's like writing an email that is challenging to write, whatever it is. But like the thing that I most don't want to do, I try to do first. And that ends up being very, very time saving because you get out of the way and then you can kind of whisk through other things.
And then what are 3 to 5 places or activities you would recommend for someone visiting Philadelphia?
Yes. So definitely visiting the Wissahickon, which is a part of Fairmount Park, which is the largest kind of city park system in the country. The Reading Terminal Market is, of course, a winner for all of the different wonderful foods that you can get and eat. And I would say, where our offices are is Old City. It's where Independence Hall is. And you don't necessarily need to go in and visit the Liberty Bell, but it's a really cool place to walk around. And then I would also say Germantown, which is the neighborhood that I talked about earlier, where we have a hyper local. It's a really, really cool place. And I recommend visitors to go there.
And then the final question, do you have 3 to 5 pieces of media that you could recommend to the audience? And this can be newsy, entertainment, any format, podcast, movies, books.
I will recommend a book called Connect by Carol Robin. It's actually kind of based on a course taught at Stanford, but is all about interpersonal dynamics, and it's connected to that feedback as a gift thing, and it's really excellent. 4,000 Weeks is another really, really good book, especially for folks like me who, try to be as productive and overachieving as possible. And it really helped me just kind of calm down a little bit. And so highly recommend. Manhunt. Yes. Manhunt is a new series that is out on Apple TV. It's historical fiction, a miniseries based on the hunt for John Wilkes Booth after Lincoln's assassination. It was made by a childhood friend, Monica Beletsky. She was the show's creator and showrunner, and it's just really excellent.
Well, thank you very much for your time. This has been wonderful.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you for listening to the Local News Matters podcast. Never miss an episode by subscribing in your favorite podcast player and sign up for our newsletter at lnmpod.com. And thanks to our production partners at Pirate Audio. Pirate Audio believes every community deserves great things to listen to, and they're on a mission to help local newsrooms reach their communities via audio. If you're interested in starting a podcast or need production support for an existing one, let me know and I'll be happy to connect you. If you have guest recommendations, others doing interesting and innovative work in local news, let me know through the contact form at the website lnmpod.com.